Hey fellas, welcome to Guys and Grief, sponsored by Emma's Footprints and First Candle. We started this podcast for fathers like us that have experienced pregnancy or infant loss. You see, when we went through these life-changing experiences, we struggled to find resources that were specifically for men in support of navigating this grieving process. We're not doctors. We're not psychiatrists. We're three friends. We're grieving fathers that have been through the unthinkable and want to help others by talking about the unique and often undiscussed perspective of men that have experienced child loss. We welcome you to join us on this journey. Share your stories, the challenges, laugh with us, maybe shed a tear or two, and help each other as we navigate honoring our children, grief, supporting our family, and trying to find better days ahead. Let's get into it. Well, hey everyone, I'm Brad.
I'm Brandon.
And I'm Brian.
And welcome to the Guys and Grief podcast. Fellas,
Woo!
we started a podcast.
Episode 1.
Like eight seconds ago, you can say you are a podcast host now. Put it on the resume.
Words I never thought I would say.
Right?
Are we trending already? That's the question.
LinkedIn profile updated, ready to go.
Oh, wow. Hilarious.
Brian, I agree. Like I thought I might host a podcast one day. I think the subject matter that we're going to talk about is one that I did not anticipate.
Yeah, that is true. I thought it might be a Bills podcast, but no.
I would agree with that one. No,
than that.
Absolutely. Totally would agree with that one.
Yeah, so
I don't know what to do with my hands actually with this microphone.
Just let them raise
and
Yeah, so listeners, you'll find out we'll tell you all about ourselves a little bit today in overdue time, but you'll find out that we're all from Buffalo and we're all big Buffalo Bills fans. So we will spare you talking about the Bills all too much, but you got to understand that there's a lot of love here amongst these three incredible men, and for the Buffalo Bills. So go Bills!
Done. Go Bills!
That's right.
I still can't believe the first phone call that I received from you, Brad, when you brought up this idea of doing a podcast and asking for advice on, what I went through and, what might be some good topics. And I'm so thankful you called me and brought up this idea.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. And so, first off, if you're listening to this, thinking about the demographic of the people that we're talking to and who this is designed for, fathers that have gone through infant or pregnancy loss, you're either a guy that's in a similar situation as us or a loved one as somebody that's supporting that individual. And first and foremost, on behalf of Brandon and Brian, we want to extend our condolences, our love, our support to each and every one of you. I can't say we know what you're going through because what you're going through is completely unique to you, dependent on where you're at, how long ago it was, what type of loss, how you cope, a myriad of things. But what I can say is we're here for you. And that is literally why we designed this thing.
Absolutely.
Well said,
Absolutely.
Brad.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's so true. And really, our hearts go out to all of our listeners. It's unimaginable what we've all been through, and you never expect it to happen to you. And then when it does, especially as a father, it's very hard to cope with it and figure out the next steps. And that's what we're here to do, to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that just falls into line of what we're here for. Like you said, just, a place that all fellas can get together and just grieve at one and have your voice being heard. I guess that's the biggest thing. We know our wives, girlfriends, so on and so forth. They've been through a very traumatic situation. So they have their piece, they have their, outlet, so on and so forth. And I guess with Brad bringing this up, we're like, when do the guys have something to,
right?
Where do the guys have a place to express? And I'm pretty sure throughout, I've been through counseling services and processes through my, through our loss, and every guy is like, hey, why don't you set up a group? 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 Oh yeah, I'll get to it. And finally we're here. Hello. Like, so.
So yeah, you're totally like, so how did we get here? I think as you were saying sort of a few minutes ago, Brian, I don't know, it had to be what, like 6-7 weeks ago that I reached out to you fellas.
Yeah.
I had one of those nights, and probably everybody can relate. One of those nights that you wake up at that like 3 or 4 a.m. and you just have something on your mind or your heart, and you're like, oh shit, like I'm not going back to bed. Like, put on the coffee, go sit on the couch. You're not falling back asleep. Right. And that idea was, for some reason, doing this podcast for men that have gone through what we've gone through. And I sat up all night, legitimately never even tried to go back to sleep. TV's on the couch, drinking coffee. And I just start Googling like a machine. I'm looking up podcasts. I'm looking up men's groups. There's a lot of men's groups out there. And those of you that utilize that support, I think that's fantastic. There's very few books. There's very few conferences or events or things that are geared towards grieving fathers that have gone through this loss. You can find dozens, if not hundreds of things for mothers that have gone through this. And I started looking down the podcast route. And I don't know about you guys, but like, I'm a podcast guy. I'm repping my favorite podcast hat here with Spit and Chicklets. So shout out if you're a hockey fan too.
Not a big deal.
Not a big deal. And I'm not a book guy. Yeah, Brandon, I know you, that flew over your head. I get it.
It surely did.
I'm not a book guy. Group counseling wasn't for me. That just wasn't where I was going to connect. And so I just kind of thought about what I use for business or for my own entertainment. I thought about podcasts, and I started looking up podcasts, and there's one podcast for grieving men in the entire world. And shout out to Dad Still Standing, the two gentlemen that started that podcast last year in the UK. I've listened to many of your episodes, really inspired by your work. And, but I found one podcast not even in North America that was started last year.
Wow.
And there's millions and millions and millions of podcasts. So I kind of percolate on this for a day or so. Those of you who start to get to know me, and certainly as Brandon and Brian do, like, once I get an idea in my head, it's hard to get shake. I am very motivated. I'm going to make sure that if I want to do something, it's going to happen. And so I wake up and I talk to my wife, Jessica, about it, and she was all in. Then I called Brandon the next day. And Brandon, what was that call like when you and I chatted?
Well, let's see here. Hey, OB, do you got time to talk? Yes, I do. I did not sleep last night. I've been percolating about this idea. What's the idea, Brad? Podcast. I love it. Let's do it. What's the podcast about, B? Oh, man, listen. We need a place to go. We need a place to, vent out, get our feelings out there. I'm game. Let's do it. So midday, you called me up about this idea, and I'm sitting at my desk at work like, how can we do this? Where can we start? Who can I connect with? Who do I know to connect with? How can I use my radio pass with this? And it just kind of all fell together mentally for me. Like, that connects well, that connects well, that connects well. And why not take advantage of the place that the location, the place that we have, that we can do it on? And why not like do it? It makes total sense, doesn't it? Yes, it does. I'm answering these questions in my head. I'll bring it to my wife, Joellen, and I'm like, hey, Joe, what do you think about it? She's like, your passion is radio. Why don't you just take advantage of it? And it's with Brad. I'm like, well, yeah, we are kind of like peas in a pod, so it kind of works out. So let's do it. No problem. So, I mean, we
probably talked like 4 times that day, right?
Within a day, you called me, around like 1 or 2. I think I talked to you again. I texted you like around 3 or 4. Then later on that evening, twice after that, so yeah, I couldn't resist the opportunity to join you on this. Yeah. And then now adding Brian. I mean, you contacted Brian literally the day after.
Hearing your enthusiasm and listen, we'll talk about our relationships, but Brandon's my brother-in-law, so Joellen is my sister. So hearing Brandon's passion, my sister's passion, my wife's passion, I'm like, maybe we're onto something. Let me call my other guy, Brian, that's been
brother
through this.
From another mother.
Damn right. Like, it's 2 of my favorite people in the world here. That we have this unique and bond that none of us wanted to be bonded by, but it's brought us closer together. And so my next call was Brian. And Brian, what was that like?
Similar call. Brian, I'm doing a podcast. You do have any ideas? I know you're very active in First Candle. Shout out, one of our sponsors.
Absolutely.
I sit on the board with them, and we'll get into it. But that was a way that I coped with losing my son Austin. And the second you said it, it clicked in my brain, just like Brandon said. Like I started thinking about all the topics and everything that went through my brain for that period of time after we lost Austin, my wife Lindsay and I. I want to talk about it, and I didn't really have anybody to talk about it. I think as a father, as a man, you hold it in, and there's just I don't think anybody that's gone through it really knows how to talk to you or really understands the true pain that we all go through. And the only people that really understand it are people that went through it. So I thought once I heard podcasts talking about our feelings, I was all in.
You bring up such a good point, Brian, too, because I think it's people that have gone through it. Nobody knows that they're going to go through it in the future, right? And we'll get into all of our stories on literally a little bit here in a moment and in depth in separate podcasts. But like and I'm not looking for pats on the back here. Brandon and Brian went through their losses before I did, and I don't feel like I was there for you guys as much as you were there for me when I went through it.
Are you ever prepared?
No, well, that's the point, right?
Yeah.
Like you guys are two of my best friends in the world, and so you were there for me, and I hope I was there for you in some way, shape, or form. But I didn't know what you were going through, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to support you, and you guys did. And you helped get me through it, and you helped inspire me. You were part of the 3 a.m. wake up and inspiration to do this. So, this is kind of how we got here. Let's tell people
a good segue in what we plan to do. And
yeah, exactly. So, Brandon, talk a little bit about So this is our intro pod, just to get to know us a little bit and understand who we are, and we'll talk about our own stories momentarily. But what is go forward look like for us, and what do we plan to do as this podcast?
Well, the goal for the podcast, like I said earlier, is to get guys that opportunity to either listen in and to kind of have their moment, their time to cope with their child's loss or their own feelings, so on and so forth, but also just to have other men, women call in and or call in. That's like I'm a true lie.
Used to be on the radio.
I used to be on the radio. Call in. WKBB. Call in and give me your top. Call in or video chat and, so on and so forth and give their story and let others hear their story. I think the biggest thing within, counseling processes, so on and so forth, or group chats that, for parents bereavement is telling your story about your child that you lost. No pun intended. Story. Sorry. You guys will soon to find out my daughter's who passed away name was Astoria, so we short name it for her. Short name is Story. So you love to hear everyone else's story of their beautiful child that is no longer here but here with us in spirit, in our hearts, so on and so forth. And we like to take that time for, all parents to, let them feel that they are not alone. And I think that's the biggest thing that, I've learned within my buddies, YouTube, figuring out that you're not alone and you're not the only one, dealing, coping, hurting, praying about, your lost child. So that's the biggest thing that I hope that our listeners, take away from our podcast is, the feel and that you're not empty, you're not alone, you're not suffering by yourself. You have other brothers, I can call them, that you can depend on night and day and night, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And even if you don't know them, if you're not fortunate enough to have a Brandon and a Brian in your life like I do, you guys have us, and we're going to be that outlet for you. And hopefully we create a community around this where we can be that for each other. And so as Brandon said, we want to, hopefully you're already starting to get a little bit of the feel like we don't want this just to be group therapy where it's all doom and gloom and tears. I mean, there's certainly a time and a place for that, and that will be a big part of these conversations, as you heard in the intro. But we also want to balance that with some levity and some lightheartedness. And that's how we as men deal with these things. But a big part of what we want to do too is talk about the things that don't get discussed for men, because I've been on podcasts with our other sponsor, Emma's Footprints. Shout out to them, who are absolutely fantastic.
Shout out.
Yeah,
Shout
they've
out.
been incredible. And, but I did that with my wife, Jessica, just a handful of weeks ago. And their podcast is called Confessions of a Grieving Mother. And it's literally all designed towards women and what the woman goes through. And a lot of what we want to talk about is both the story that we've been through, but specific topics that are relatable to men that have gone through this. So Brian, what are some of those topics you see us talking about with other guys on this podcast?
Yeah, I think you really touched on a main word, Brad, and that's community that we're in. And we really don't want this podcast to just be the three of us grieving out, our own pains and losses. What we really want to do is talk to other dads, really ask them questions about how they dealt with certain situations. And we think that's important. Things like, how did you start eating the week after you lost your son or daughter? I'm kind of half kidding, but when did you think about going back to work? Did you go back to work? How did you handle your marriage, and how did you communicate with one another? What toll did it play on you? Because, I mean, we all know it's hard enough, being a good father and married as it is without loss, but having that pain and suffering on both of you, and you have to be supportive for your wife, which is very important. But we want to dive into that, and we want to talk to other dads and talk to each other about, certain things that helped you through the process. There's a lot of triggers out there, as an example. How do you deal with those dates, those birthdays? It's a very tough subject to talk about, but we want to be as real as we can and, as open as we can, because frankly, I never had anybody really another dad at least tell me what I went through. We lost my son, Austin, almost 3 years ago. And, it wasn't until I started talking to Brad and Brandon and talking about certain situations, and you realize, oh, wait, I actually had to go through that as well. We still have jobs, we still have friends, we still have family, and it's a really hard world to navigate after you go through a loss like that. And I hope
the house
this
still
podcast
works.
I hope this podcast can help with that.
Such a great point. And, so we'll really focus these future podcasts not around us. This isn't for us. We have each other. Our outlet is each other, truly. It will continue and become even more pronounced by having this podcast, but it is really for you all as listeners to both join us and share your stories and talk about, some of those big topics. And if you're not ready to join, totally understand that, and to just listen. And, we'll really try to design around some of those bigger topics that maybe there's some that are more appropriate for you or more, they speak to you more. And those are the ones we want you to listen to. So let's back up. Beep. Let's back up the truck up a little bit. Who are we?
We need like an audio, like,
beep, beep. Who are we, and why? Clearly you all have gleaned that we've all gone through loss. But I think it's important to just level set who we are, both as men, as people, as we are all fathers of living children too, which is pretty incredible. So we should do probably some quick introductions of your personal life, and obviously just a quick snippet of the loss that you've experienced. And as I level set earlier, we're not going to go too deep on this intro just because this is designed to be an intro, but also we are going to do individual podcasts in short order, one for myself, one for Brandon, one for Brian, to really deep dive into our individual stories. But Brian, why don't we kick off with you? Yeah. Who's your dad? What does he do?
All right.
Anybody got that? Do you remember that? Come on. Who's your dad? What does he do? Nobody?
Is
Kindergarten
that from
Cop. Come on.
Kindergarten Cop.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I busted out a kindergarten cop reference here.
Schwarzenegger. Yeah. When
Yeah.
Oh
Right.
my gosh.
So Brian, what do you do?
So
Yeah.
obviously, you just highlighted how old we are. With
Should I hit the Mark clip? Is that a clip?
Seriously, hold on, wait. Do we have the drum roll here? What's the
So this is
comedy
Brad
drum
Kogan.
joke?
He's 60 years old.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Kindergarten Cop.
Golly.
But Brian, who
yes.
are you? What do you do? What are you into? Your family, and briefly about Austin.
Yes, thank you. So my name's Brian Scruton. I am a commercial real estate broker. Grew up in Syracuse, New York. Played soccer at Cornell, and ended up in Connecticut as a real estate broker. Me and my beautiful wife, Lindsay, shout out Lindsay, you're the best.
She is.
We had our beautiful son, Colin, and Austin was our second child. He passed away in his sleep when he was 5 weeks old. It was devastating. He was our second child. Again, that was about 3 years ago. We're actually coming up on his birthday, which is December 14th. So
Next week.
We'll get into that. It's a tough time of year, but he's with us, and we were lucky enough to have a rainbow baby who's Grace. She's 2.5, and now we have a newborn Eve, another daughter who is 2 months old. So hectic
Beautiful.
household at the moment, but thankful to be here.
Brian,
Absolutely.
real quick too, I gave the a little allude to Brandon and I's relationship. Brian, how do we know each other?
Well, Brad, we met at Buffalo Wild Wings watching
Oh
a
man.
Buffalo Bills game. I thought you were part of our group of friends. You were just a Bills fan. And,
Just another guy sitting at the bar watching the game.
Next thing I know, we were buying mosaics on Bedford Street in Stamford.
That's true. Buffalo Bills mosaics.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, I'm on your dodgeball team, and the rest is history.
And
then I'm very thankful to know Brandon for 5 years.
Hold on. I'm sorry. I have never heard this story.
You
That
never
serious.
heard this?
Oh yeah,
You guys, wait, hold on.
We'll save it for the post production here for
Oh
the
my
deeper dive. But
Can we? You
Yeah,
still
we met
have the
randomly at a bar.
mosaic, right, Brad?
I do. I'll maybe bust it out for one of the future
next
pods.
podcast, you have to show that on video.
Done.
Because I think I lost mine that night, maybe because I might have had too many Labatt Blues.
But that would have been
Cheers to the
12, 13, cheers, 13 years ago, somewhere around that time.
Yes.
And we've been incredible friends since, and we've seen each other through loss, through physical challenges that you have personally gone through, Brian. You were announced my wife and I at our wedding, and have always been incredibly close and incredibly good friends. And so I'm honored to do this with you, brother.
Thank you, brother.
Absolutely.
Brandon, literally brother. But
Yeah.
Literally, brother.
who's your dad and what's he do?
It was a dark and stormy night of November
We don't-
22nd, 1982. No, let's see here. My wife, Brad's sister.
Who are you first? Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm Brandon Thurman. I'm a 40-year-old middle-aged man living in the great
Just
city
turned
of
40.
Buffalo. Just turned 40, by the way. Living in the great city of Buffalo, New York. Go Bills. And met my beautiful wife here in Buffalo, Brad's sister, Joellen, educator here, dean of students at the same school I work at with my wife. Yes, I work with my wife. Yes,
She's his boss.
Not a
She's
big
my
deal.
boss.
Dean of students.
that's another conversation. I might need my own hour or two just to vent about that.
And
But
working
that's a
for
whole-
your wife. Yeah.
working for my wife, but that's a whole nother story.
Different
pod.
podcast we're going to do later.
Separate
That's
podcast.
right.
That's called
We've already signed
Guys.
ourselves up for like 9 podcasts.
Oh, good. That's called Brandon just in this depression. So don't worry about that. No, but no, I love my wife. She's awesome. We work fantastic together. We've been working together for
Truth.
10 years now. So I think I like her. We had our oldest daughter, who is Gavi. Gavi is 5 going on 45.
Mhm.
And she's our little diva. And then we had our daughter Astoria, who passed away 2019. So they're going on 3 years, almost 3-4 years now. Yeah, birthday's coming up in April 7th. So she had the umbilical cord wrapped around her throat twice inside of my wife, and she was stillbirth. From that point, we had to give birth. And from that day, we all are new parents and different parents and a whole new person from that point on. My wife is extremely strong, and I think within that, I became stronger just on supporting her within the situation. So there's a few things that, we'll talk later on about just, again, holding down the fort while your significant other is, going through their own situations and going through their own, hurt and things you should or shouldn't do or shouldn't say around those, particular times. So, I'm not saying I'm the guru of it, but I'm also saying that, I've learned that there's some things you probably shouldn't say, some things you probably shouldn't do, and just, be supportive as best as possible. But that is Brandon in a nutshell.
Yeah. Brandon, you bring up a awesome point here that's sort of resounds in the intro of, where we say we're not doctors, we're not psychiatrists, we're three friends. And I want to just zoom in on that for a millisecond here. Like,
yeah, no problem.
I don't feel uniquely qualified to be the host of this podcast. Like, I can't sit here and say I've grieved better than most men. I've supported my wife better than most men. I've been a better father to my son Ashton than most men. I've got all the tools and tips and tricks, and listen to us talk about this shit. Like, right. I don't know about you guys, and I really want to actually be conscious of that. Like, I don't want to speak for you guys ever on this, because I don't want to assume similar situations or similar grief, and I want to not do that for other men. But like, I don't feel like, let me be clear. I'm not hosting this with you guys because I feel like I've nailed it.
No,
we're
still all learning.
It's the worst thing you can say, and we'll get into it, and I'm sure another episode, is I know what you're going through. Like, how many times have you heard a friend say that? And the reality is you don't, and nobody does. I mean, Brad doesn't have a sense of what I went through. I don't have a sense of what Brandon went through. They're all different situations. We have different personalities. It's all about love and
great point,
support, and that's kind of where we want to come from,
Yeah. So, and I'll certainly introduce myself a little bit more here too, but like, I want you all as listeners to understand, like, we're doing this not from a place of expertise. We're doing this, the word we've used a couple times now is to just create this community, and that by what we've collectively found, and again, I just did it, I talked on your behalf, what I've found, but because of the two of you, is that the more we talk about these things, the more that I have other men in my life that have experienced loss, and loss in whatever way, shape, or form, that are an empathetic ear and are willing to connect and listen, and just genuinely listen, and also ask genuine questions, not just brush it off, the more healing it is for me. And that's what I'm hoping that we can create in this podcast, is that type of community here that other men can listen. If you're looking for expert advice, there's probably books or things like that out there for you. That's not the three of us. But what I'm hoping we bring is like that real life understanding of what these scenarios and this experience is like. And hopefully there's healing in talking. And hopefully there's, the connected community by having the conversations of what we've been through. And maybe there's another dude out there is like, yeah, I've been through exactly what Brandon's been through. Either maybe the way that you lost a child, or an experience that you'll talk about and that you'll connect with. And so I think that was just something that I wanted to bring out here.
Who's the host of this podcast?
All of us?
You're supposed to introduce yourself, man.
Yeah, why don't I do that? I'm Brad.
Good
Brad
segue.
Kogut. Yeah, thank you, Brandon. There's P.S. Before I do that, do you realize we're Brad, Brian, Brandon, all BRs. I lost Beckham, and I also lost Astoria, and we lost Austin. I'm sorry. I lost Ariana. Brandon lost Astoria, and Brian lost Austin.
3 A's.
4 B's, 3 A's.
3 A's, yep.
Kind of crazy. So I'm Brad Kogut.
Symbols. Look for the symbols.
Right.
Stars align for a reason.
I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for just about a year now. You probably all picked up on Brian's story. We met in Connecticut when I was living there for many years, both Connecticut and New York City, where I met my absolutely stunning former Disney princess wife, Jessica. And we lived in Connecticut for many years, moved to Pittsburgh after our first loss with Beckham, and to get closer to our family, who is in Buffalo, where Brandon is, and Ohio, where Jessica's family is. I am an HR executive at the largest residential real estate company in the world. Really fortunate to have a great career, and I've worked in some fun industries. Former hockey player, I've done that my entire life, still do it now at 38 years old, and albeit don't come watch me because it's pretty bad. But at one point in time was good. And, have a lot of, try to still keep those types of things as hobbies. Have an unbelievable son in Ashton. He just turned 4 in September. Ashton is absolutely incredible, and the light of our collective lives, Jessica and I's. So you've heard the story about Brian with Austin and losing a child with SIDS, Brandon losing a child at stillbirth. My story is a little different, where we've experienced multiple pregnancy losses at earlier stages in pregnancy. We had 2 very early miscarriages before Ashton. And when I mean early, like 9 weeks, which are still emotional and hard to deal with. We fortunately then had Ashton, and then we went through a very painful loss of Beckham at 20 weeks of gestation. So 20 weeks of pregnancy. Beckham was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and unfortunately we lost him as a part of the complications due to that. We then kept trying and had 2 more early miscarriages at that sort of like 6 to 8 week range, going through IVF for months and months and months. Brandon, I know you and Joellen did the same. Yep. Found ourselves very, very fortunate to get pregnant again, which was very difficult because of the complexities with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and the chromosomal issues. But we found ourselves actually getting pregnant again with a beautiful baby girl, Ariana, that we came to then lose at 14 weeks. And so our loss journey has been before our living son, Ashton, and, at varying degrees, multiple times afterwards, and added to the heartbreak of losing Beckham on November 19th, 2020, and Ariana on November 18th, 2021, literally 364 days apart from one another. And so, I think it's important that we share a little bit of our stories and the understanding of why we have maybe some credibility to talk on these topics, because we've been through it. But hopefully also, for those of you listening, you've got 3 guys that are really, really close with each other and supporting each other that have very different experiences. Mm-hmm. All of our individual losses are, of course, unique, but quite literally unique at the stages of when we've lost childs or, what we've been through. So you may gravitate more to one of us than the other. And I think that's the beauty of bringing these 3 men together to have these types of conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said.
Well said, Brad. I mean, I'm lucky to be sitting here with you guys, and I appreciate both of you and love you both, and all of our listeners. I know how hard it is, hearing it or diving back into your feelings, but we're here for you. We're here to listen. Please, always reach out to us if you guys ever need anything.
Absolutely.
Definitely so.
Brandon, any final words as we start to wrap up here too?
I want to make sure our listeners have the opportunity to reach out to us. So I want to make sure that's recognized and said. Don't hesitate to give us a holler, regardless of time, questions, so on and so forth. We'll be glad to answer any questions that you guys might have. If you would love to join our podcast, be an interview, be involved of some sort, don't hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely. Guys and grief.
To tell your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it does. And I sit on the board of First Candle, and I've been talking to dads for probably about a year now, and we'll post on our social media our personal numbers. Like my line is always open to
Absolutely.
talk to people.
Yeah, so we're at guysandgrief@gmail.com. You'll hear that in the outro as well in a moment. Once we officially launch this thing, we'll also launch some Facebook and Instagram pages in a similar fashion. You'll hear that in the outro as well. But we want this to be genuinely for you guys. This is an outlet for you to connect, to listen, to create community, to discuss the topics that nobody else might be willing to discuss with you. Or you just want to discuss with some more people. So that's what we're here for. So Brandon, Brian, I love you dudes.
Love you guys also.
Love you, brothers.
We're on a pretty special journey here, and I could not think of two better men in the world to be a part of this with. And I can't wait to meet some more of these other guys that are equally as incredible, that want to share their stories and their journey in some other way, shape, or form. So we look forward to those opportunities. We will be releasing new podcasts every Wednesday. So we will have this, and then we are going to have a guest join us in between individual guests. You will then hear our story. So we'll have a guest, then one of the hosts, a guest, then one of the hosts, a guest, then one of the hosts, and then we'll continue on with guests. And we have a lot of ideas and topics and things that we want to cover off. Brandon touched on those. Brian did a little bit earlier. But if there's other ideas that you guys want to hear about too, if there's things that we just didn't think about, email them to us, mention them to us. We're here, and by no means, like we said, we're not experts. We just got a lot of ideas, and we've created a platform for those ideas to come to life. So we need your help on making sure that those are the right ideas that are going to make the things that you want to know about and that are going to help you go through this experience a little bit easier.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Shout out to all of our lost children, to our loved Beckham and Ariana, Austin and Astoria. We'll talk a lot more about you all over the weeks ahead. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Love you guys.
Love you guys.
If you valued from this content, we ask you to share this podcast with others that could equally benefit. Leave us a 5-star review on whichever platform you're listening to help us improve our outreach, and to follow Guys and Grief on Instagram and Facebook. Also, if you'd like to join us and share your story, email us at guysandgrief@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.